Okay, well, our next session really asks you to think a little differently about where you get some of your inspiration. And, we can all spend hours watching TikTok videos to learn a dance that will, get us on the For You page. And as I said, we will be learning the Lizzo dance later. The new one, Teresa, the new one, not the one I've already taught you, the new one. I'm on it. I'm on it, right? Well, Skibbity's old. We're not doing that. It's all about Lizzo. Anyway, if you've seen our Reels content, you will know that we're all into that, and you'll have seen Charlie here. Stand up, Charlie. Charlie's role is now to be the face of everything. Um, honestly, the people that comment on his hair is really quite something. In fact, last year's event, we actually got feedback on his hair. In the official feedback, right, that you'll be emailed tomorrow. Anyway, it's not about Charlie. Sorry, Charlie. This is about data and how our next speaker is going to really show that data isn't just for nerds or SEO people. SEO people like data, don't they? Data can spark an idea. It can prove a point. It can get somebody to take the action that you want them to take. So it's super powerful. But it certainly does not have to be boring. And that's great, because we've brought somebody who is very much not boring to Birmingham, to the stage this morning. Autumn's coming, folks, and I'm expecting on his content to see, what coats to wear this season. Honestly, he's a style icon, this guy. If you took part in Marketed Light a couple of years ago, you'll know that you're in for a treat. So I'm excited to get into this. Please welcome Thierry Ngutegure.
So the way I see creativity is that these two things really are akin. They live together. So if data is a collection of original statistics and creativity is a use of original ideas to create something, then surely they are akin. They are the same thing, right? So the idea is that you are coming together to create something novel that hasn't been created before, and so therefore they are one and the same, in my opinion. So yes, data meets creativity. Now, just to go into data, before we delve into the whole creative aspect, I just wanted to really touch on, I think, a couple of mistakes that I think agencies, companies, brands, etc. make when they're thinking about data or they're trying to use data. And one of the first ones is actually, reacting to innovation without any audience context. So we've all seen the rise of TikTok, right? As soon as TikTok came, it became millions of users on platforms, hundreds of videos, view timers, surpassed that of Facebook. Oh my God, if you're not on TikTok, your brand is dead. And I totally get that, right? But it doesn't mean that everybody should be there, right? So then we've jumped, and there's no greater explanation for that than the metaverse, for example, right? So the metaverse was launched, Facebook, renamed themselves, and we all lost our minds. We're like, yes, I need to buy an NFT of a weird-looking chimp thingy-mabob. And it's going to be worth £1 million. And so then we all jumped into that just based on the fact that innovating for innovation's sake. And we saw trends and everything go up, but actually, realistically, what was the purpose of that? We moved because we saw one singular unit of data change. And then there's the other side of it as well. So this was pen portraits. Now, I don't hate pen portraits, but I think in a world where, I'm a different person to what I was last year and the year previous and 6 months ago, and God's honest truth, I don't even want the same thing I had for lunch last week. I think we need to be a little bit more agile in the way that we look at data, especially from an audience perspective. And so then when we're spending like 20 grand doing pen portraits that don't move for 4 years, and we stick it up on a wall and go, Anne is our, individual that we're talking towards, but we haven't done that in 4 years. Anne's a very different person now, There's a lot of stuff that she doesn't really give a shit about anymore. And there's a lot of stuff that she actually does really is kind of passionate about. And so then I'm a firm believer in continuously using data as a way and a measure and reflection on how people behave, think, and feel, and that we should always be tapping into that no matter what. And then there's a really great example as well. So only using accessible data. So yes, we're tapping into what people think. But a great example here was with Tropicana, where they did a piece of audience research that hinted towards them going through a rebrand. And they thought, yeah, this small group of people have told us, yeah, a rebrand would be pretty cool. Spent 30 million quid on it, then lost 20 million quid trying to fix it. And so then a 50 million pound hole later, they realized we should probably go back to the old one, because they looked at a single view of a data and made an entire decision based on that. Not taking into account, their brand ethos and power, and even from a search and organic perspective. And, there's so many things that they didn't look at, and they just reacted to, a group of people. So sometimes data singularly can lead us down a bit of a hole. But yes, we'll talk about how we can kind of navigate that creatively. So here are some great real-world examples, though, of where I truly believe some brands have laid the foundations with data, and it has entirely built their brand upon it. I think that sometimes when we talk about data, there's a couple of things that we get scared about. So we get scared about data privacy. So the amount of times now you're like, accept cookies, reject cookies, accept cookies, reject cookies, right? Save how many times you visit a website, right? And we get really scared about it, and sometimes when people show us our data, because of data breaches, and it really is close to our heart, we get really fearful about it. But no brand has done it better, in my opinion, than the likes of Spotify. Spotify has ultimately taken exactly how their audience behaves, what you're into, what you love, what you dislike, when you like it, how often you like it, and serve that to you. So every time, I think it's done like once a year, they have their Spotify Wrap report at the end of the year, and everyone shares it on social media. Whether you love Drake or Metallica, everybody's on there sharing about it, right? So what their behavior's been. And what they've done there is really just understood that the cultural nuances and differences in sharing your data, it's not about sharing your data, it's sharing your experiences. And if we can get data that reflects that and is a little bit more creative and inspiring, then people are more than willing to show that. And another great brand that's done this really, really well, especially in a really, quite bland, in my opinion, sector, is Monzo. Oh, well, interestingly, I've just spoiled it for everybody. Not Monzo. Netflix. I'll do Monzo later. Netflix. Just going to go hide. Netflix, actually, I think has really revolutionized this. Now, Netflix is interesting because unlike Spotify, where they're quite literally giving you the data and then you are showing it off to your friends, Netflix is actually working in the backgrounds to provide you content based on your own behavior. So they do a really good job of like their A/B testing, which I find absolutely phenomenal. So they'll have hundreds of thumbnails of the exact same show across multitudes of different countries. And what they're testing here is, at what point does somebody click through and watch something? Is it when there's a villain in the foreground? Is it when it's blue? Is it when it's actually animated? Is it the main character? Is it, the protagonist? What is it that's actually making people really engage with it? And as soon as they know that, they'll then serve that exact same kind of thumbnail to people who behave in a similar fashion to yourself. And it's a really brilliant way of getting engaged into TV shows and understanding what it is that your audience thinks, loves, and is really inspired by. Squid Game, most recently, I think, really perpetuated that, because ultimately, it was actually quite a weird TV show. Did anyone watch it? Yeah, it was a bit weird. I'm not gonna lie. It was a bit weird, but that's exactly how they got it. And I guarantee, if you put your Netflix kind of homepage side by side with your neighbor, your friends, people at work, you'll have a completely different experience to what engages you and what really inspires you to watch a certain thing. And I think, Squid Game was a really, really, really great example of that. So, how can we then create campaigns like this? So I'm going to take you through a 3-step process that I go through when I'm going through campaigns and thinking about it from a data-led narrative. Now, when I'm brought in within the way that we work within my team, I'm not brought in to think like everybody else. I'm brought in to think, with a data-led narrative. And that's the whole point as well. I'll talk through around our creative process and why I think it's important to have, neurodiversity around the table and, a difference in thoughts of opinions when it comes to ideation. And as my role to play here is to come in there with a data-led narrative and think about how can I make 10x this with understanding who my audience is and the data that we have served to us. So the first point is ideation. And I think ideation in a world where we are like the amount we're consuming is unreal. It's almost impossible, sometimes as well as like an agency, to continuously generate new, novel content, something that no one has ever seen before. And so then we've got to a point where actually creativity is the new currency. And so then this is the whole point of this session. If I can add something a little bit extra for you guys from a data-led perspective that can help ignite that creativity for you, it will ultimately fuel the work that you've done. And our audience is subscribing to our creativity. That's ultimately actually what they're doing. It's regardless of what product, whatever they're watching, doesn't really actually matter. They're subscribing to how creative we can be. And so therefore, ideation must be protected at all costs. And just a couple of tools that I use, for example, when I'm ideating. So this is from a data-led perspective. BuzzSumo, really great tool. So that helps me analyze top trending content. So what that will do is it will look at how articles have been shared online and the engagement rates of certain articles, so I can understand what my audience is reading at any given time, as well as serve me content ideas of what is being engaged with across social. So that's a really cool tool. When I am coming up with ideas as well, it's quite hard to understand where to go to from a data perspective. So I don't know if any of you guys ever used Google Scholar back in the day. I think it still exists. Ultimately, Google just condensed academia into a single search function so you could look at papers. They've done the exact same thing now with data, and it's just called Google Data Store. So you can go on there as well and have, literally, you don't even need to know what the word is. So for example, I was looking at like how many empty houses are in the UK, and I was just typing empty houses, but I didn't realize it's called dwellings, for example. And it's a tool like that that will really help you understand how things are categorized and understand where you can, a great way to start with looking for data. Google Analytics, I really love pointing this one out, but it's more indicative of your own data. I do think sometimes we're really quick to run out there and find data in the ether. But actually, if you think about the amount of data you already hold, whether it's transactional or how people behave on your site, or even understand why people aren't purchasing certain things. You're like, oh, I've written this piece of content, no one's reading it. Great, actually, that's a really insightful a piece of data there that you can kind of be like, okay, amazing, right, well, in terms of content, that might be a bit of a miss and we might not go down that avenue going forward. And then Ahrefs is brilliant, so competitor content research. Pop in their domain or URL, understand how well engaged it is, how many backlinks they've got there, how many traffic, etc. And it can show you, it's a great way of understanding something popular has happened and I would love to emulate something like this. To what degree was it popular, and what kind of content was created around it, and therefore how can I be creative within that realm? And another really useful function as well is I don't believe people Google that well, in my opinion. So here's, you might want to take a little screenshot of this. The guys at Neomam, Giselle, she put this piece of content out there, and she's awesome. And it just gives you a really interesting way of actually being able to Google so you can get the right things. Because I think sometimes we Google in the way that we think is a bit of verbal diarrhea, but actually there is a method to the madness. And if you use it correctly, it will surface the right content for you and the right types of inspiration. So yeah, do use Google wisely, as we say. Also, follow newsletters. So particularly one of my favorites is YouGov Daily. So YouGov, big market research company, but they put out daily polls. So everything from, do you think Boris Johnson is a word I can't say out loud, to what brand of wet cat food are people buying. But it's really topical. It's about what is happening within society today. So a really interesting question they put out there for a client that I used most recently was, due to the cost of living crisis, will you be cancelling any of your subscriptions? If so, which ones? Brilliant piece of content there, and understanding how people, how the current global economy is impacting people's pockets. And so therefore, as a business, as a brand, how should I therefore be reacting? And not being insensitive. And, I've seen bits of content out there where it's like, inflation busting prices and things like that. And it's like, sometimes we just need to be a little bit more tactful in the way we get that content out there. And then Charter as well is a brilliant one. So they take pre-existing data and they visualize it in just a stunning way. And I think sometimes with data, it's just quite hard in the way that you see it. So you might see it in an Excel doc and think, what on earth is that even saying? So sometimes it's just quite inspiring to have a look at how other people have actually visualized that data in order for you to be able to understand that story and maybe even create one of your own. And then earlier on as well, I touched on how within the ideation process, I really do think it's important to not only have a neurodiverse group of people when it's coming up, when we're creating campaign ideas, But also it's imperative for you to have a way of measuring it. So this is where I implement data within our framework. So we have the masterpiece framework, and basically we go through any idea that has been surfaced. There is no such thing as a bad idea, in my opinion, unless it comes from me most of the time, to be honest. And the idea is we go through this masterpiece framework and you answer each one of those questions, and each one of those are then numerical. At the end of it, we have a score, and it surfaces ideally the most relevant to our audience as well as to our objectives, as well as the ones that we believe are current and topical and will do well. And so then it's a really great way of actually, you know, letting data as well surface some things that might have not come to the top. Because how many times have you been in a brainstorm and you've given an absolutely incredible idea and then your director goes, yeah, that's great, but I'm doing mine. Right? And it happens. And so, but yours was like undeniably a brilliant idea to your audience, as topical, etc. So this is a really great way of separating, you know, titles and what people think and feel, and going, actually, if we, you know, put data to this, it can really kind of surface the most creative and relevant ideas. And then when it comes to creation, I think there's one thing that really gets a bee under my bonnet. I as a market researcher, I love surveys. I think surveys are incredible in understanding, you know, what people think and feel in the moment consistently. And it's a great way of, as I say, you know, getting first-party data. But I think we've taken the mick a little bit in the sense of, has anyone seen these ads, the Garnier ones? 73% of women think this is the best product ever based on 2 women. And this is where we've got to, right? So we've got to a point where we're using data now to just shape the narrative that we just want to get across and be like, just bend it to our will. Whereas actually it should be a guiding star in understanding, I didn't actually, you know, I didn't think that that was a thing that an audience could think about. I never even thought that that was happening. But instead, yeah, we're just bending the will to our own needs. And so then when it comes to the ideation process, and even in the creation process as well, a rule I always have is, I'm just picking on surveys. I don't know why. They're just the easiest way to pick up on. That's not me. I wish it was. I tried to create one. And I think that anybody who says we should do a survey gets a timeout. The reason why, is I don't believe you should be coming to a brainstorm and dictating how an idea will be framed. Because as soon as I come and say, I've got an amazing idea, I think we should do a survey on, I immediately know, and you've limited how big that idea could be and how, you know, what we can discover from it. You've already told me the method you're going to use to get it. What is the point? Come through with the idea, stick and stay true to the idea, and then we'll find out the way. Okay, brilliant, this idea is amazing. What is the best vehicle in order to deliver this? It might be a survey, it might be something else, it might be third-party data, it might be our own data. But I think sometimes we come in with a pre-described notion of how we've worked previously and force it down on an idea, and I don't believe that's correct. So, yeah, I have been in meetings where it's especially, I think, do you know the function on Google Meets where you can like kick someone out of a meeting? I am the devil on that. And if I hear anybody say, we should do a survey, bloop, you're gone. That's it. So I've got my own Squid Game going on. And then a really great example, I think, as well of, I was talking about earlier, about how I think people have gone and taken the data that their audience has and resurfaced to them in a really new and novel way is Monzo. I was right this time. And I'm obsessed with Monzo. I've brought like every product that they have. And it's just because you've got to think about the financial sector, right? So it's being dominated by your Barclays and your Halifax and your HSBCs for donkeys. They don't show you squat. You barely even get if you used to have to go to the bank to get a bank statement and like get it printed off in like reels. It was all very shady stuff, and you know, no one really talked about finances. And I think as Brits as well, we're not very open to that kind of money conversation. And so then what Monzo did is understood who their audience is, and they said, right, well, if we're talking to Gen Z or millennials or whoever, whatever letter we've come up with this year, then we should be talking to them in the way that they talk to across all other products. So why can't we tell them how they're spending their money and surface it in a really unique and novel way? So really interesting way there is, you know, how much people are spending on Greggs versus Pret. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be groundbreaking and academic, because obviously there is probably per square mile more Greggs everywhere than there is Pret in the north. But it's a really great way of, engaging with your audience and understanding that and using the data they have given you, banks and banks and banks, and resurfacing it to them. A really great way that they use it as well over COVID as well was showing how, restaurants and takeaways have changed when we opened up. I think it was like April the 12th or something, when we were allowed out to go to restaurants, and how it then spending overtook. And it's just a really smart way of using the data that you own to just engage with your audience. They're already giving it to you. And it's not as if you're giving away banking information or saying, hey, Thierry, you should probably stop spending so much money on Deliveroo, but whatever. It's just a really great way of engaging with your audience. Similarly, with pubs opening as well on a Saturday and showing expenditure. They've done a summer one as well to show like where people are going and how many paellas people have bought, and really engaging content with the data that they already own. I did something similar with a recruitment company, a jobs board agency. They're called Adzuna. So they are like the aggregator of jobs available online. And one thing I like to do when I'm trying to come up with campaigns, especially from the data-led narrative, is actually take the journey the customer is on. So I went onto their website and I registered and I went through the application process, and I realized that it had a function to submit your CVs. So then I thought, okay, well, how many CVs do these guys have on bank? And they had 2 million CVs. Because what they do, ultimately, is they have a system that checks for spelling, any grammatical errors. It even says people who have jobs like you would write a CV like this. Really great tool. But then I thought, you're actually not using your 2 million banks of CVs, in my opinion, in a creative manner. So then what we did was go, right, well, if I know what is on your CV, I can say, well, somebody who went to a university like yours and studied a course like yours, on average, has a job like this, and that job earns X amount. So now I can start serving people content where I say, actually, your degree is worth X amount. Or people called Thierry, on average, earn X amount. Or here is the average length of time that people spend in certain jobs before they jump, and where do they go to? Looking for a career change? Great. I've got 500,000 other people who have done the same, and typically people who are nurses move to radiography or whatever that might be. And you can start now serving content that is super, super useful to your audience based on the stuff they've already given you, right? So then it's just being really, really, really kind of creative with that. So yeah, value my name and how much is your degree worth? Mine's probably not worth that much now. I did it in biological sciences. Look at that. Here I am now. A really interesting way as well is using a single source with a new hook. So I think we're in a prescribed world where we kind of have to be like, oh, I need to go get something new or whatever that might be. This was simply using IMDb data, which we all have access to and we've all used previously, and they just took a novel twist on it, right? So they just looked at the ratings of the last episode of every series and just provided that content. It wasn't something that was owned by them, it wasn't data that they've collected, and nor was it a new source, but the story and the hook that they brought out with it was far, far, far better than anything that I've seen anybody do before. And it's just a really smart way. And it's evergreen content as well, right? So they can continuously add new series or compare the last episode of other pieces where like actors and actresses are featured in different series. There's a lot of content that they can continuously grow here, and it's a bit more of an evergreen. So yeah, House of Cards apparently has the worst one. Game of Thrones, to be honest, should be first. Awful. Don't waste your time. 7 seasons. Christ. And then also another way as well of using a single source. So this was the profanity index, right? So this was looking at movie scripts. So now that we have, subtitles are the norm, we therefore have movie scripts, and all of this is open data. So then why can't we then analyze really simple text analysis of saying, here is a list of profanities, please count how many of these come up in this data set. And you can have a look at which films have the highest, most amount of swear words, and also which actors swear the most across their films. And it's just a really, as I say, like, who would have thought subtitles could create a really fun campaign? Another great example as well, but this way it's more about not being numbers. So this was a really fun campaign. I can't remember for the life of me the people that put this together, but I thought it was brilliant. And what it did was really test the brand strength, right? So they went across and said, right, Ferrari, the brand, car brand, right? Yes. Draw their label from their badge from memory. And it was a really interesting way to see how much, we say these are massive brands, but actually when it comes to a concept of brand recall, it's actually a lot harder than you think. And, it's a really fun way of showing how strong some brands are, especially from like Ferrari, from like a color perspective as well, a color spectrum. And then what they did is they then mocked up those badges on those cars as well. So it's a really quite fun way. I've seen this, a couple of iterations of this being done as well, in terms of like kids doing it. And the reason I say it's data as well, because ultimately you can do match rates with this as well, how close people were, or, how bad you are, how good you are. Are northerners, better at recalling versus southerners? You can really play on those kind of cultural differences between people. And I know that with a lot of data as well, as I say, when we bend it to our will, correlation does not mean causation. So this has been thrown around a million times. But yeah, letters in the winning word scripts of National Spelling Bees versus, people killed by venomous spiders. And if I was to remove the two, variables in terms of naming them, you'd be like, that's a pretty strong correlation. Yeah, absolutely, bang on, but probably not. But I think this one is actually pretty spot on. And the way I slept last night, I'm not going to lie to you. I guarantee this was it. But yeah, per capita cheese consumption, the people who died by becoming entangled in their bed sheets. And I slept on top of the bed. I was not having it. I'm not being taken by a sheet. But yeah, it's just a really nice way of just showing that correlation doesn't always mean causation. And sometimes, if it looks too good to be true, you might just want to question it a couple of times and just make sure that that data-led narrative that you're putting together stands the test of time. And also, I think there's a thing to be said that when we are surfacing data to people, we have to understand that numerical literacy isn't something that everybody has. So if I told you, there's a 40% chance of it raining on Saturdays, some people might interpret that, is it 40% of Saturday? Is it 40% of the region within that place? Is it 40% of the day? Is it 40% of all rain that could fall, will fall on that Saturday? There's a lot of ways of chopping up that data. And so never have assumptions that, oh yeah, well I get it, so therefore, 68 million other Brits will do. Just make sure that you're constantly showing it to other people, and that's why that neurodiverse, ideation process is super, super, super important. And then I'm just going to go through some data sources so you guys have some bits to take away as well. So these are just like fun data sources, not so much like, because I know people always point to things like ONS and things like that, and I'm like, yeah, I get it, they're cool, but like, what's a different way of looking at certain bits of data and sources? So feel free to snap ahead. So Google Mobility Report, has anybody seen this? It's pretty cool. So Google, basically at the start of the pandemic, they obviously have access to Google Maps and therefore our mobility and where we're going, if we're going to work. I even tell it, this is my house, and I differentiate certain things and tell it I'm going to work. And so then what they're able to do right at the pandemic is start tracking that mobility to say how many cities or countries have returned to pre-pandemic levels at certain aspects. So they'll do everything from residential to, shopping to, like workplaces. And so then there's a really... there's no end to this data, so they collect it weekly, and they just said, we'll stop collecting it when we get bored. So I download it every week. But it's a really great way of showing how the UK, even the globe, has moved during one of the most poignant pieces, poignant times of our lives. And from a campaign perspective, you can look at, which cities have returned to the work the fastest. The work from home capital of the US, for example. Really quite interesting ways of looking at how people behave. Similarly, as well, Centre for Cities, they release this data as well. So this is looking at a load of data around footfall and expenditure in cities within their high streets. So you can look at whether spend has returned to normal. You can compare cities as well to look at high street expenditure. And considering the current climate we're in, I think this data set will be quite important going forward in understanding their impact on a city level within the UK. So yeah, really, really cool data set there. Reddit, I'm obsessed with Reddit. I don't really post anything. I'm just a bit of a lurker on Reddit. But it is brilliant for getting inspired, because people post like infographics and instead of just like Excel spreadsheets. So it's a great way of understanding how something can be visualized. I've put a couple of subreddits for you guys to follow there. Those are the ones that I follow just to get some inspiration. And what I love from it is not that I take the content from it. I go, that story is amazing, and then I'll delve into the data set because in order for it to be posted, you have to have had the correct like references. And this is a really good one because this is super simple. Like, what did iPhone users get for Christmas? By looking at App Store rankings like the day after. It's smart, right? So Oculus, your Alexas, your Fitbits. You can do this again for Black Friday. There you go, free campaign. I'll invoice you all, actually. And then just quickly onto evaluation. So how we visualize and communicate data, as I said, is of vital importance. Data literacy isn't open to everybody. And I think one brand that does it epically is Pinterest. I think they do it amazing. So they do these Pinterest reports where they basically just show you in a really novel, unique, and really inspiring way about how people are engaging with their content and really kind of behaving and searching on their platform, and it's stunning. And so therefore, whether you're using a Google Data Studio dashboard or you're creating something like this, I think the way you really communicate data is just as powerful as the data you're actually showing people. So what have we learned today? We've learned that data and creativity can live hand in hand, absolutely. And also, don't just collect data, develop insight that gives you a different perspective on a particular creative challenge. So use it to inspire, to ignite, to even, verify whether an idea is good and to what degree. And then make data your leader, not your micromanager. So don't ever think like, oh, for God's sake, I've got to put... Well, most of the time, it's actually retrospective. People are like, I've come up with an idea, Thierry, can you stick some data on it? And I'm like, I will throttle you. So yeah, make it your leader and not your micromanager. And just before I step off stage, as it's winding down, I just wanted to make a point out to our book club. So we run a book club. It has everything from business to personal development, and we all come together and we talk about everything from Radical Candor. So that's one of the books that Katie talked about earlier, which is actually forms the foundational values of Journey Further. And we discuss everything from, as we say, business development, personal development, and talk about how, as marketeers, we really have a responsibility for the culture and the environment we're building here in Britain today. So sounds like I'm actually gunning for for Sunak's job, but yeah, there we go. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to me, and have an incredible day. Please grab me on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, grab me outside for coffee, whatever it takes. But I really hope that I've inspired you guys to think a little bit differently when it comes to data. I'm obsessed with it, and I think that we all should be. So yeah, thank you so much for lending me your ears.